In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to construct these unique looking earrings. It's a new design I came up with during the summer, and I absolutely love the combination of the rice paper with the wire and the beads. The earring consists of two distinct parts. The primary component of the earring is this unit shape that's characterized by an arc with coils on either end. The main body of the arc itself is flared out and made out of nickel silver 18 gauge wire, and the central component contains the hang-in loop and is locked in place with spirals. It also holds the beads in place, and it's made out of 20 gauge wire. To finish off the earrings, I attached my handmade ear wires that are made out of 20 gauge sterling silver. And what is the colored cylinder in the center of the earring? Here we see blue, red, purple, green. It's rice paper. And I have an interesting technique that permits you to insert the rice paper into the coil and then transform it with varnish into a very hard substance. And of course it's colored with watercolor paint. Before we jump into the construction of the actual earrings, let's introduce the tools that we'll need and the materials. Well, we're going to need to work with a pair of round nose pliers, chain link pliers, of course our side cutters. These are beautiful side cutters. They get the job done. To flare out the 18 gauge wire on the arc and also on the ear wire. Notice the back of that is flared out. I use my chasing hammer, and I hammer it on a steel block. We will need a paintbrush in this case to apply the watercolor to the rice paper. And we do need a small X-Acto knife to cut the rice paper. Here's another tool that we're going to need to use. It's a homemade contraption of mine. It's used to form the arc with the coiled ends. And I'll demonstrate how to do this when we get to that point in our construction process. This is a 3/4 inch piece of wood, and in it I've drilled a hole that allows me to insert the screwdriver, and I've used the Phillips head because a regular flat screwdriver will flare out here and you'll never get the coil off. See the hole right about there? That's to insert the wire and hold it in place when you're doing the wrapping. Of course, you don't have to use a screwdriver for this. This is an improvised tool. Improvise it any way you choose. Another type of pliers that we will need to use are our bent nose pliers. And a ruler will always come in handy. I like to work on a cutting board. And of course, we take precautions and wear safety goggles to protect our eyes. To make these earrings, for the wire, I'm using two different sizes. Heavier 18 gauge wire that will be used to form the arc with the coil. And for the central part of the earring that attaches to the ear wire and ends with two spirals and holds the beads, I'm using a lighter gauge, a 20 gauge wire. We'll also need beads of your choice. I prefer the wooden beads. I know I mentioned this before in the other videos. One reason why is if the wire is too thick to pass through the bead, you could always drill the hole out a little larger. We'll need rice paper. A close-up of the rice paper that I like to use. Has a beautiful, natural, fibrous look to it. Some watercolor paint and paintbrush. The first thing that needs to be constructed is this unit over here. This is the heart of our earring, into which everything else is inserted, including the rice paper. The rice paper is actually attached and literally glued to the coils over here. Let's begin. I'll take an end of the wire and stick it in the hole that I drilled into the screwdriver. Let me take this off. What the hole does is it locks my wire in place, making it easy for me to wrap the wire around the screwdriver. How many times around did we go there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Insert our wooden dowel. Pull the wire up and around the dowel on a diagonal. Notice that. The wire goes from one point to the opposite point. And I'll wrap my wire one. Nice, tight wire wrap. Beautiful. Separate it from the spool. Carefully remove it from the tool. Let's even off this coil. I'm going to cut it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm going to cut it at that point 6 times around. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Beautiful. Okay, that worked. Let me prepare another one, because we need two. We're making a pair of earrings. Stick the wire into my coiling tool, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I went a little extra because I'm anticipating I have to cut off over there, so that's why I went 8. Even though I know that I only want 6 times around ultimately. Why do I have a line there? I have a line there because I always intend to drag my wire across the same side of the dowel. This way, I'm certain that the arc that I'm creating will always be the same size. And notice I've gone from the right side to the left side of the Phillips head screwdriver. And now to create my coil. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cut off the excess. Remove it from the tool, the homemade tool. I want this to be 6 turns around in length, just like the one I just made. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nice. Trim that. Trim that off. It's easy to see where I'm going with this, but I'm not finished with these units. At this point, I need to reinsert my screwdriver into the coils and then flare out the wire like you see there. We'll put the unit back onto our screwdriver. Position the arc up against the steel block, and I begin to work with the hammer. The hammering process also straightens out the position of the coils and makes them exactly opposite from one another and not going off on slight angles like you could see here. Very subtle, but if you look, this is more vertical. This goes off at a slight angle. It's the hammering process that corrects that slight irregularity. Here. See how I have to bend this to put this on. Now notice the one that's just been hammered, no bending necessary. It slides right into place. I always check my flares to make sure they're both the same. This looks a little narrower, so I'm going to hammer it just a bit more. That part of the earring is finished. Now the trick is to get that in there. How do we do that? The first step is to determine the width of paper necessary to cut to be able to span the distance from here to here. Now, this cutting board happens to be marked off in 1/2 inch gradations. From the top of that to the bottom of that is 1.5 inches long. Therefore, I need to cut a piece of rice paper that is slightly smaller than 1.5 inches wide. From the strip of rice paper that you just cut 2 sections, approximately 1 inch long. One piece. Two pieces. This will be wide enough to create the cylinder that needs to be inserted into the metal unit. How do we get that in there? I'm going to use a toothpick, and that's going to help. Also, I'm going to use my squeeze bottle. You've seen me use this in other videos, and I should have pointed out, I like these squeeze bottles for dispensing water and varnish. Makes the job a lot cleaner and a lot easier than using paintbrushes. To insert the rice paper into the coil, I take my rice paper and I very carefully wrap it around. Having wrapped the rice paper around the toothpick, now I insert. And I have to give it a little bit of a turning motion, but it works. I insert the rice paper with its toothpick that strengthens the rice paper into the coil. Notice the toothpick is inserted the full length of the rice paper. That's to provide the rice paper with enough support so it doesn't collapse when you dampen it. And this is important. Notice I like to dampen it with the applicator. I'm not soaking it, I want it damp so the edge of the rice paper lays flat. Okay? It's a round toothpick. I think I neglected to say that. You don't want to use a square toothpick. That makes no sense. You want to use a round toothpick. and I'm going to leave it alone for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to lay it down. To prepare the other half of the earrings, I take my rice paper, position it on the round toothpick, and twirl it like so. Insert it into the metal unit. Carefully work it into the second coil of the metal unit. Pull the toothpick out just a little bit, not all the way. You just want to get it right to the tip. Take a little of our water, dampen it. That's it. Now that we have our rice paper inserted, one's a little bit wetter than the other. The next thing is to apply our watercolor. Well, I happen to like blue, so I'm going to go with the phthalo blue again, like I did in this one. I'm going with a single color, and I'm going to allow it to bleed. And here. I'm going to give it a few minutes, and then after giving it a few minutes, I'm going to apply a little bit of the dilute varnish to that. This has been standing for about 10 or 15 minutes. Toothpick is still inserted into the rice paper. Reason for that is to prevent the paper from collapsing. And now, with it still inserted, I'm going to apply a couple of drops of my varnish onto the paper. That will saturate the rice paper very quickly, and as the varnish dries now, the rice paper will be transformed from a very delicate material to a much more harder substance. I cannot leave the toothpicks inserted. To remove the toothpick from the metal unit, I don't touch the rice paper at all. I would destroy it. This is extremely delicate at this point. It may take you a number of practices to get this right, but it's well worth it. I'm going to very carefully slide the toothpick out, and if the toothpick is thin enough, it should not pull the rice paper with it. There we go. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Now, I have to confess, I have had practice doing this. It may take a little practice. You have to get the feel of it. And the only way to get the feel of it is jump right in, try it. If it doesn't work the first time, experiment with the way you slide the toothpick out. Eventually, you will get it. It will connect. Watch me again. I don't touch the paper at all. I very carefully hold the base. Sometimes with my fingernail, I press my fingernail up against the toothpick to prevent rice paper from sliding out. Along with it up, there's a little rice paper movement. Ooh, this is not good. I'm literally pushing it from the bottom with my fingernail. Lost a little paper in the process, but no big deal. What I need to do before I can go on any further is I have to allow this to thoroughly dry. Now that I applied some varnish to that surface, there's enough varnish to transform the rice paper into a harder material. I'm going to allow it to air dry. And then when I come back, I'm going to apply more varnish. The objective is to transform the structure, the combination of rice paper and metal, into one singular unit where the paper is locked nicely into the metal. And the way to do that is through the application of varnish. So we're going to let this dry. Then we're going to come back and we're going to add more dilute varnish. The dilute varnish is what is readily absorbed into the fibers of the paper, turning it into a nice hard material. It's been a while since I applied dilute varnish to the rice paper. And the rice paper is thoroughly dry now. But what I need to do is apply more dilute varnish. What I like to do is to apply the varnish to the inside of the tube or the cylinder and let it suck in to the fibrous paper. That will effectively harden the rice paper, especially when it's baked. Put a few drops of varnish in there. That varnish was absorbed right into the paper. Let me approach it from this end. I like to just fill it up until it drips out the other end. Ah, there you go. I can see it now. As I move it up and down, I can see the varnish squishing around in there. But I don't want to have that much excess varnish in there because it'll solidify and eventually clog the opening. So I want to get that varnish out. An effective way of removing the excess varnish from the inside is to carefully stick a wire through it. That'll pull any of the excess varnish out of the piece. I'm simply going to put it down and let it dry. At this stage, having applied varnish to the inside, you want it to dry. Avoid touching the paper. Paper is still very fragile and could be damaged. Once you bake this at 150 degrees in the toaster oven, the paper does become very hard. Now that the rice paper is completely dry and relatively hard, I'm going to apply another coat of varnish to the surface, still using the diluted varnish. Really like the effect of the translucent, or is it more appropriate to say opalescent, rice paper. We'll position these in here, let them dry, and we'll come back in a few minutes to complete the earrings. While we're waiting for this part of the earring to dry, the varnish to dry, let's continue with the construction of the center part. To make the center part that's going to hold everything in place, we'll require 2 6-inch lengths of nickel silver wire. So let's cut the wire. Good. So we have 2 6-inch lengths of wire. First thing we need to do is bend both lengths in half. Having bent both ends, I'll use my round nose pliers to create the top loop. Holding it firmly with the round nose pliers, I use my chain link pliers to crimp the wire, forming the loop. Let's do it again. My bent wire, position it at the same spot on my round nose pliers. Now I use the chain link pliers to crimp it. Nice. So what do we have? We have the 2 center lengths that we'll need to insert into this unit. Because I had a readily available pair of ear wires, I decided to put them on now rather than form them on the earrings after the earrings were made. Next step is to position the beads. So there we go. Notice I do like to work on both halves of the pair at the same time, maintain an equal development. Now we insert our beautiful cylinder, blue cylinder, onto the 20 gauge wire. Okay. Position the bottom beads I like the way the dark beads frame the piece. Really nice looking form. Okay. Before we create our spirals, I like to flatten the wire out a bit. And what I mean is I like to flatten out the tip. Good. This is going to work out nicely. We have the ear wire in place. All that remains to be done is to create the bottom spirals, and this pair of earrings is finished. Using my round nose pliers, I firmly grab that tip and give it a turn. Repeat the step. The curved nose are excellent pliers to use to create the spiral. Look at that. And there we have a finished earring. Same thing. Grab it with my round nose, give it a turn. Curved nose pliers are beautiful for spiraling wire because it allows you to very easily see what you're doing. This is a fun pair of earrings to make. What's particularly nice about it is the diversity of color and shape and texture. Hope you enjoyed watching the video. I certainly have had fun making it.